Our speakers for this morning are going to be Jessica Hovland and Katie Gran. Jessica started working with Department of Human Services as a VR counselor for 3 years, and recently she was promoted possibly to a title of Quality Assurance and Support Specialist through the Division of Rehabilitation still. Katie Gran worked as a VR counselor for 9 years and then worked as a deaf specialist for Department of Human Services, and recently has transferred over to be a transition specialist with Division of Human Services, Division of Rehabilitation. Both of these ladies have worked in the schools with your students as VR counselors, so I think you'll find the information they have very beneficial because they've been where you have been at some point. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jessica and Katie.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jessica. As Cindy said, I am with the Voc Rehab Services as the Division of Rehabilitation. And I think Katie is sharing our PowerPoint. So I'm just going to share a little bit more about myself and our agency, and just share that, like Cindy said, I worked as a VR counselor for a few years before I was promoted to more of the admin level last fall. And so I had the pleasure of working with 11 schools on my territory and getting to know kind of that process and working with the teachers and the school staff and really collaborating on a lot of things. So in being asked to do this presentation, just kind of sharing a little bit more about what worked and what didn't work and how we can continue to improve our collaboration between schools and Voc Rehab for the benefit of our students.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie. And like Cindy said, I was also a counselor for about 9 years, and I worked with the school districts out of the Sioux Falls area, northern Lincoln and southern Lincoln counties. So before I moved into the program specialist. So we'll get started. South Dakota Rehab Services is a division of the Department of Human Services. Our director is Eric Weiss, and our assistant division director is Bernie Grimmie. Our sister agency is the Services to the Blind and Visually Impaired, who serves individuals primarily with vision impairments and blindness, while DRS serves individuals with all other disabilities. Just as an FYI, we recently added a transition resource tab on the DHS website, so feel free to check it out and refer students and their families to it for more information. Throughout the presentation, we'll talk about some of the items that can be found there. So why is there a need for collaboration? At the school level, there are critical classroom modifications and accommodations that are based on the individual student's needs. Similar supports and services could be provided by VR while the student is on the job or moving into a post-secondary setting. So with good collaboration, these services could potentially continue seamlessly. And today we're going to offer suggestions and guidance on how everyone can work on improving the relationship between VR and school districts. The overall goal by the school and VR is to help the students be better prepared for the adult world, whether they decide on finding employment, going to post-secondary schooling, and/or living independent living and social skills to be as independent as possible. Teachers have a lot on their plates as it is, so partnering with VR can help fill in the gaps needed by the students so that they can learn more about what's available for them to make an informed choice about what they want to see available once the high school staff is no longer an option for them. So please remember to begin inviting VR to IEP meetings as early as possible. The more the student and the family meet with VR and hear about the services available, the more likely they will understand how the services could benefit them. And once an application has been taken and the student has been determined eligible for VR services, the first step will be discussing what their employment goal is. Conversations will take place to ensure that their goal is compatible with their interests, skills, and abilities. If their employment goal isn't compatible with their skills or limitations, the VR counselor can assist with exploring careers that are within the same scope but are more suitable to their abilities. Services will be determined on what is needed for that student to achieve their employment goal.
Sorry, I have to remember to unmute myself. So this slide is a comparison between the IEP and the IPE. And my understanding with this presentation is we have a nice variety of both VR staff, transition specialists, and school staff. So just wanted to really highlight some of the similarities and differences and how those two different agencies, whether it be the school with the IEP or Voc Rehab with the IPE, can really work together to make sure that we're covering all of the bases for students. So as you know, as teachers, both the services under the IEP are pretty comparable to those that are provided under the IPE or the individualized plan for employment under Voc Rehab. When we look at the IEP, you're really looking at the individual's present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And overall, it's just more comprehensive because it has to include all educational components and address any like modifications and accommodations that are needed for the student's needs. VR with the IPE, on the other hand, is more service-based, related to employment, of course, because that's our ultimate goal with serving individuals. But when we partner with the school and that IEP, we can really help the student and their family be aware of services and supports that are available to assist them in completing those IEP goals. So for this example, we have a student who attended a career tech education in welding. That was one of the classes that he did. And this particular example is of a student from Timberlake High School, and we got the school and the student's permission to share some of this information. So I'll plug that little note in there. But really wanting to highlight that, like, he took a CTE course in high school, really fell in love with welding, but wanted to increase those skills. He also on his IEP had a goal to increase competencies in writing and reading, a goal to lead his IEP his senior year, and then overall decided that he wanted to attend post-secondary for MTI for welding, or at MTI for welding. And so in collaboration with the school, the IPE, or the services from projects or from Voc Rehab, we really were able to support the goals on the IEP by providing that project skills experience where the student was able to get a job in welding and build on those skills that he learned in the class. We were able to help provide assistance in resume and cover letter development. So his project skills work experience was used to create a resume for him to take with him after high school. We also helped provide some advocacy services, talking about how to be his own advocate and in preparation for post-secondary or even on the job site. And then of course we also allowed for the opportunity to explore training and financial aid options related to what schools provided that welding program that he was interested in, what kind of financial assistance was going to be available to him, and how to go through that process. So as we take a look at how these two agencies can really work together, again, it's the Voc Rehab side of things can really help to support the conversations and the work that the school is doing with the student and the family to develop those IEP goals and then actually implement them. If there are goals on their IEP where we can't provide an actual service, things that the school has to do themselves or the student has to do themselves, we can still be there to provide that consultation and technical assistance along the way. really just be there to provide that external support and guidance as a professional agency talking about life after high school. This student in particular that I was talking about, I'll give you a little bit more background on him. When I was a voc rehab counselor, I covered Timberlake, and I actually met with this student twice during his high school career to complete the application for services. And neither of those times was he able to get parents to sign off on it. They just really weren't active in his schooling. They were just kind of, they had their own priorities, unfortunately. And so he really was working hard on his own things, but he wasn't able to do project skills or get any of these other services from voc rehab until he became a applicant and was determined eligible for services. So literally the day that he turned 18, they had arranged for him to meet with voc rehab. He was able to sign his own application for services, get right into project skills, and then was able to really tie in all of these extra services from voc rehab right in his senior year. So really working with project skills, all that resume and cover letter development, the advocacy and the financial aid and training options was done like in a short period of time, which is more difficult than if it were to be, if we had been able to work with him for 3 years versus the 1 year, we could have gotten a lot more done. But as it is, we did accomplish quite a bit for him. Katie, you can go to the next slide.
So developing a partnership, here are some ideas that we came up with that we wanted to share to do this. So visits shouldn't be only at IEP meetings. There should be more meetings on a regular basis for students and teachers to get to know the counselor better. Some meetings to discuss are a fall meet and greet. This could be scheduled prior to the school starting or right at the beginning of the school year. This meeting would be to catch up, meet new staff, discuss a referral process between the school district and VR, identify opportunities for collaboration, and so on. There could be a winter check-in, which is to discuss progress, if there's any adjustments that are needed and ways to continue collaboration. You could do a spring evaluation where you can discuss what worked and didn't work for that school year, talk about the progress of the student goals and summer plans for students. You could also consider monthly meetings to discuss specific students' needs and progress being made on their IEP and IPE goals, or even schedule monthly meetings with students one-on-one so VR has more direct connection with those students. If anyone is interested in receiving more information about agendas to use or talking points for any of these types of meetings, you can find a document on the TSLP website from the WINTAC. It's collaboration between voc rehab and Department of Education. Or my email will be at the end of the presentation, so feel free to email me and I'll send it to you. It's a long document, but the appendices that they provide can be helpful if you don't want to read the whole thing.
I see that I've gotten a couple comments in the chat box sent to me. These are questions that we will work on explaining throughout the presentation, and if we don't get to any of them, there will be some room for additional conversation at the end, so I'll just plug that in for a second. So this next tab on the developing a partnership, it really is about the referral process. So as VR counselors and staff, we are dependent on teachers to pass along referrals so that we can provide those pre-employment transition services for pre-ets is what we call it. So really developing an effective referral process is really important so that we can make sure that we're getting the students that we need to be serving and making sure that we're not leaving anybody out or waiting until the last minute if we can help it. We really want to see students sooner than that so that we can start working with them and building that rapport and providing some of that counseling and guidance and additional services. So as we're talking about a referral process, something to consider would be working with your counselor to develop a shared tracking document between you and your VR counselor that could include information about what students have been referred to VR, what students have like completed the application, and then what their VR status is, and so on. So some kind of Google Doc shared document or other referral process to really communicate and make sure that the school and the VR counselor are on the same page with where everybody's at through the process, so that there's no delay in providing services that can be prevented through just better communication. One of the documents, or I guess that document that I just mentioned, could be used. Other things that could benefit or be of help to that would be to really just have a discussion ahead of time, kind of at that fall meet and greet meeting, or at the beginning of the school year, at the end of the school year, just having an established meeting to talk about ways to streamline the application process. We can't modify what is included in the application process, like we have to have all of the paperwork signed and all of that. But are there ways that we could make that a little bit smoother or less time consuming? So one example would be having the VR counselor. If you have 6 students that want to apply for services, you could have the VR counselor and a support staff come together to the school and just do a day-long process of one application after another, so that all of those students are getting in at the same time. Making sure that we're able to do that kind of in a timely manner rather than delaying it or spreading it out throughout the school year, so that we can get those students into the process as soon as possible. Timberlake, for example, when we met with Michelle Martin, who's the SPED director up there a couple weeks ago, she talked about how they actually did this recently, where my former supervisor and the support staff or counselor aide from that office went to the school. They did a day-long application process where they met with, I think it was like 6 or 8 students. And the school actually used it as sort of a job interview practice, where the students knew that they were going to be having this meeting this day. So they dressed up, they practiced some interview type questions. And so this was really not just a voc rehab process, but they also used it as kind of an IEP activity to meet some of those additional goals. Katie?
Yep. So the more the counselor is seen at the school, the better the chances the student will know who they are and what we can do to help. Asking a VR staff person to provide a presentation on employment soft skills, interviewing skills, or how VR could be of service to them would be a great way to expose the students to VR. But please remember that not all VR counselors will be comfortable giving presentations, but this is a service that still could be provided by a different VR staff member. So don't be afraid to ask. As transition specialist, I can always assist the counselor with these types of presentations. So again, my email will be at the end, but talk to your counselor and we'll go from there. And on the DHS transition resource tab, there's a short video discussing VR transition services that highlight different services available through VR, including project search and project skills. So that might be helpful for students and parents to better understand how VR can assist them when you start talking to them about inviting VR to their IEP meeting. Encourage them to watch that video, so then that way they have a better idea of the services that we can provide for a better chance of you getting yes to them, to that question of can VR be at the IEP meeting.
So this next one is about engaging families, and I think we all know and understand that family engagement is extremely beneficial for students, both in the school setting and the VR setting, and that we can't always count on families to be engaged the way that we would hope they would. But hopefully we can work together to really increase that family engagement and make sure that families and parents understand the outcomes that schools and voc rehab want to see are the same ones that they want as a parent for their student or for their child. So really wanting to make sure that we can try our best to make family members a part of that partnership by helping them see past the student's disability and focus on the real skills and talents that their students possess, really that the potential that we can work together to kind of cultivate and work on to reach the goals and abilities that the students really have. So when we work together, we can really show that families that doing that work is available with supports that we can provide as a partnership and as a team to include the family themselves. So something we can do is to ask the families really what they want to see in their child's future, while listening to their goals and offering supports and services that they will need to get them there. So some families might start with smaller goals for their students, and then as successes are shared with them, we can increase those goals, and families might be more willing to try goals that weren't an option to them before, or that they were hesitant to try out before.
We all learned pretty quickly this past spring that using platforms like Microsoft Teams or Zoom for video calls, and or of course the traditional option is conference calls, does work when face-to-face meetings aren't viable for whatever reason, national pandemics, the weather, so on. So start things off right by having conversations about options if travel isn't possible, to see what technology could be best used so that students and families are still gaining access to the information that they need. Obviously, in-person meetings are preferred, but I know with back to school plans, some aren't allowing visitors in their school districts, some are doing the remote learning, or things come up and maybe this is the second or third time that this meeting had to be rescheduled, so it's a last minute request. Counselors understand that these things happen, but if we can make it work to attend, we will. So make sure you still send us that invite, have that conversation with the counselor to see if they can't be there in person, maybe they can be there by either Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or even by phone so that the information is still being shared. Before we go on to the next slide, I'm gonna quick address some of these questions that have popped up. So it said, you said to start inviting voc rehab as early as possible. What might a plan through voc rehab for a student look like at 16, then at 17, and again at 18? How early can some of these programs start, like the project skills, advocacy programs, etc.? Plans are going to be based on the individual student. So what it'll look like for one student might not necessarily look for the second one. So it's not a very black and white answer. Project skills can start as early as 16. That's really the only service that we provide where there's an age for when they can start that service. The rest of them can begin at any time. Counselors could be doing career assessments with them to help narrow down employment goals. They can be part of referring that student to maybe classes that would best suit that employment goal that the student has on their plans. It could be making sure that they're aware of TSLP events like Catch the Wave, Let's Talk About Work events, the summer transition programs that we have available throughout the states, making sure that they're aware of them so that they can apply, talking about project skills and project search for down the road. So there's a variety of services that we can provide. Hopefully that answers your question a little better, Larissa. Jessica, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
I think just that, like, students can become eligible for voc rehab as early as 14, really at that, like, getting ready to enter high school or freshman year of high school. And so what services we're going to be providing at that level might look completely different from what they were going to look like as they're getting ready to graduate, or they're continuing on to get transition services through age 19, 20, 21. Traditionally, or in my experience, I did a lot of just general counseling and guidance with students. Typically, I tried to meet with them on like a once a month basis because that was my availability with having 11 schools on my caseload. It's going to look a little bit different for each school district, each school within that district, and the counselor's availability. But really, I think this is where we want to emphasize just having that communication and collaboration between the school and the VR staff that's assigned to them to figure out what works and what the students at your school are really needing. One thing that we really try to emphasize is that we are more than project skills. We really have the ability to provide those additional supports and services like the career exploration, the basic counseling and guidance. I did a lot of just how's things going at home and how is that affecting your ability to do your homework, or how are your classes going? How are you getting along with your friends and your teachers? Is there anything that we could work on to make things a little bit better? Are there attention issues that we could work on? Do you need to sit farther up in the classroom or back in the classroom? And just kind of talking about the things that are already supposed to be or are included on their IEP with the student directly to make sure that they really understand what's going on and that they have the ability to advocate for themselves if what is on their IEP isn't working. Encouraging them to speak up at their IEP meetings, that's something that we really try to work on with students so that it's not just a bunch of adults sitting around the table deciding what should go on for the student or what should be a part of that IEP meeting. And I know schools do a really great job of asking the student, but it can be intimidating when you are 14, 15, 16, 17, or even 18, depending on your disability, to sit at a table and everybody's doing basically an annual review of your progress over the last year. For you to be able to stay, you know, this is really working for me, or I think I want to try something different, can be difficult for students. So if we have the opportunity to visit with them as voc rehab before that meeting, it can really help with making sure everybody's on the same page and where everybody's meeting the needs of the student. Hopefully that makes sense.
Then the next question, could a job shadow over the summer be part of a project skills plan for a student? That's kind of two separate services. VR can help with both, obviously setting up a job shadow, but a job shadow is more of a job, like an informational interview where they would go to the job, kind of observe what happens there, and kind of take a hands-off approach for the tasks that are required for that type of job. Where project skills, it's paid work experience. So they're doing the actual tasks for an employer and they're getting paid for that. So both could be provided as long, project skills can continue over the summer, as long as the school district talks to their counselor and make sure that they're available for any coaching supports need that student needs, and any on-site monitoring that's still required of that quarterly assurance of match report for project skills. So hopefully that answers your question, Deb. So now we're getting to the point where we want feedback from you all. Part of building a good working relationship is getting feedback from all parties. So we really want you guys to put your responses in the chat so this information can be gathered and shared with counselors at an upcoming training that Jessica and I will be doing specifically for the counselors. So the first question, oops, go ahead.
Sorry, can I hop in?
Yep.
Katie and I really wanted to make sure that because this is a training on collaboration, it shouldn't just be us saying, well, these are the things that we want you to help us with as VR counselors. It really should be a conversation to decide like what is working well, what's not working well, what do we need to consider doing. Like one of the questions I got in a private chat was, will VR be physically or virtually attending meetings and providing services in the fall? So to answer that, it's really up to the school district to decide, or that school to decide, are you allowing visitors into the school? If so, how can we make that work to have voc rehab come in, and how often, and where do we want you to meet? Do we want you in the general classroom or in a private office or a conference room, or what is that going to look like? And if we're not able to come into the school, how can we get there without being physically there? And so that's where that the virtual meetings that we have all come to really become familiar with over the past 4, 5, 6 months can change the way that we provide services in the future. So if we have the ability to connect virtually, that gives us the opportunity to meet with more students because we don't have to consider travel time or changes in, central time to mountain time, time zones, and it really just gives us a little bit more flexibility. So there's some positives to that. The negative is that, you're not always getting that face-to-face interaction. You're not able to necessarily go visit the student at the job site like some VR counselors like to do. It really is, as you know, there's pros and cons to both, or to using technology, but it's, I think it's something that we all need to really try to consider to make sure we're still able to meet the needs of our students with this situation and environment that we have with COVID and everything else going on. So there's a couple more questions popping up, but I think if you're okay with it, let's just go through some of these questions on the slide first, and then we'll get to those, if that's all right with everyone. So Katie, I'll just go ahead and answer or ask this question since I'm already talking. So if you guys would add in the chat, what services do you know of as teachers that are currently being provided by VR in your school district to your students that are helpful, that you see a benefit of?
Don't be shy. We really would really appreciate your feedback. Project skills. Project search, visits with students. A monthly check-in by the counselor. Right, we would be throwing candy. Can we throw virtual candy? Project skills does produce a lot of questions. And I know that there's going to be a presentation later today about project skills. So hopefully you're able to join on that. This is great. Well, don't be afraid to keep adding in your input, and we'll go on to the next question. What additional supports could you use in your classroom from VR? Weekly group activities in schools. I assume that's for the first question, right, Cindy? Larissa, I would encourage you to watch that video on the transition resource tab. I think that'll answer a lot of questions, as well as we're going to have a frequently asked questions that we get as counselors a lot slide coming up. So we'll address some of those too. But that would be a great starting point for you to kind of learn about some of the services. more information about services offered, call or talk to parents to arrange outside of school setting.
Tanya, or Sonia, do you mind expanding on that a little bit in terms of like what would you like to see outside of the school setting? Does that just mean like meeting with voc rehab?
I can unmute people so they can, if they would like to voice in, they can unmute themselves.
All right. Well, let's go on to the next question since it's kind of slowing down in the chat. So what is one area you would like to see improve for the upcoming school year? Getting kids to learn about their community. Some kids with cognitive disabilities just don't really go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. Thank you for sharing that, Cindy. I assume that's the transition flyer. If I click on it, I don't know what it would do to my screen sharing. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Presentations to community groups or school board on services. Understand that VR is much more than something through the schools that they can benefit throughout their lives. Absolutely.
I love
That's
that.
one. Yep. That's one of the questions that we're going to address later, is that VR can be provided at any age and at any time, as long as there's a disability and a desire to work. I don't think that some people fully understand that. There's been times where I'll meet with the student and the parents get referred for our services. So tribal voc rehab to attend meetings when invited and not cancel. They've done a lot with youth leadership. Yep, TSLP, the youth leadership is great. We are not tribal voc rehab, we're state voc rehab. So those are two separate entities. Does the SPED teacher or other staff teachers need to be involved with initial meetings between voc rehab and the student and the family? Sometimes it seems we only see them at IEP meetings. That can be one of those discussions that you have at that fall meet and greet. It's not necessary for the SPED teacher to be, if we're taking an application on services, although you guys can provide us with some great insight about the student, so it never hurts to be a part of that. But if we're taking an application, you know, just have that conversation with your counselor on whether or not you need to be there, or if you can provide insight and suggestions afterwards too. Small group mini lessons would be great. Maybe through the interview process and helping set up mock interviews, maybe coming in and doing some self-awareness. Great. Pre-employment skills, more VR counselors getting invited to IEP meetings. These are great. Can you tell us more about what a fall meet and greet is? We've never done one. That's something that just came out on a new training that Jessica and I watched. So, but a lot of it is, it's just having a meeting with your counselor at the beginning of the school year, or right as school starts. And like we talked about, it could be meeting new staff, the SPED director, the superintendent, the transition SPED teachers, or even maybe the teachers that deal with like 8th or 9th and 10th grade, maybe ones that have never really met with voc rehab, so that we can just explain what our services are, answer questions about the services. Maybe we could start talking about what service students you currently have in your classroom and how they could benefit from our services. It's really just a way to get to know each other and talk about what we can do to provide services and supports to you as the teachers for these students.
The fall meet and greet is something that I did without calling it that when I was a counselor, especially because I was a counselor for 3 years, but I took over a caseload of somebody who had been in that position for 25 years. So they had a really strong relationship established. And so I was coming in as this new person going, I don't know anybody. And I am a completely different person from who was here before. So let's talk about what worked in the past, what's going well, what do we want to see different as we have a staff change, how can I support you as the teacher, and what kind of supports do I need from you as a teacher so that we can really make sure we're meeting the needs of the students. And so sometimes that was talking about the dynamics of the school setting. So does this school have a really strong team where you have 4 or 5 people or even 2 people that are really providing transition services together and really have a strong buy-in to voc rehab and all of the different agencies that can work with students? Or is this a school setting where it's really one person, that SPED teacher, SPED director, who feels like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders and not a lot of support or buy-in from their superiors or even the other teachers in the school? So this might be an opportunity for, like we mentioned earlier, or like somebody else mentioned earlier, how can we support each other as professionals to make sure that we're meeting both the needs of the students, but also each other, to make sure that we are able to do everything that we could be doing. So that fall meet and greet, I also tried to do one kind of at the end of the school year just to check in and see like, okay, what did we do this year that worked well? What didn't, like what goals did we have that we didn't quite get to? And what do we need to know in preparation for the next school year? What students do we have coming up on our radar? How can we, or when do we need to start that application process? Really just making sure that we're prepared for a positive experience the next year.
That one document that Cindy shared earlier from the WinTech about collaboration between VR and educational partners. If you go to that, it gives you a lot of great information, agendas. Those appendices are great towards the end of that document if you didn't want to read the whole thing. But it really outlays a lot of things that you can use and make it your own. Even that referral, that Google Doc that Jessica mentioned earlier, there's a template on there that you guys can consider using. Do you support students on 504 plans? That isn't a special education service, so getting the 504 where, yes. Yes, we can provide services if they're eligible. Please know that just because a student is on an IEP or a 504 plan doesn't guarantee that they will be eligible for VR services, since there is a different eligibility process for that. So, you know, talk to the counselor that serves your school district about that student and talk to them and see, and then we can take an application and determine if they're eligible for services, and we'll go from there. 504 students aren't eligible for project skills, but we have other paid work experience programs that they could be eligible for. 14 is the youngest that we can take an application on. So 12 and 13 are a little young. They can't take an application on students that are that young, but at 14, we can start taking applications on those students. We'll go on to that next question. So how can we work together to accomplish this goal, to increase the collaboration between schools and the voc rehab office?
So really this question is, as we've been describing all of these things and talking about what's working, what would we like to see from voc rehab, what do you think as schools or even as voc rehab counselors that might be watching this, what can we do to work together to accomplish some of these goals? And try to be, and for the sake of time here, try to be kind of brief but detailed, concise, I should say, in your responses. But really, this is an opportunity for us to kind of share that responsibility where as voc rehab, we can do these things a little bit differently or better to meet the needs of the schools. And as schools, what do we need to know about voc rehab to make the process a little bit more beneficial for us and for our students? So this, you don't necessarily have to put this in the chat, but just kind of keep this in mind as we move forward. And looks like we have about 10 minutes left. So Katie, do you want to jump to the next slide?
Yep. So here are some of the frequently asked questions that we hear a lot. Does VR only provide services to special education students? No, voc rehab is a state agency that works with individuals of all types of disabilities and ages to obtain or maintain their employment goals. VR can help people identify their vocational interests and abilities. Anyone who has a physical and/or mental impairment that substantially interferes with his or her ability to work should be referred to a local VR office. This includes students with IEPs and 504 plans. It also includes students who do not necessarily need to be receiving special education services, but still have a disability within your school district. And like I mentioned before, at times I've been taking an application on a student and their parents apply for services as well. So one thing that I'd like to stress is don't ever assume your job is not to determine whether or not a student will be eligible for VR services. That's the counselor's position. So always refer. Don't ever assume that a person will be or won't be eligible for our services. So make sure you make that referral so the counselor can determine that based on the information that we gather.
So this next one is about, should I wait to refer students to voc rehab during their final semester of school or once they graduate? And I think we've covered that pretty clearly. Like the sooner we can meet with them and get started on the process, the better it is for everyone. The later that we start that process, the more difficult it is to cram services into a small period of time, especially if they're looking at post-secondary. When we have time to work with them and build rapport, it's a lot, we have a lot stronger relationship, not just with the student, but also with their family and with the school. And we can make sure that we're making referrals to other agencies that might be appropriate to the student and really spending time on a lot of those other discussions or topics like Social Security or the FAFSA that, the students are required to go to that FAFSA informational session, but they, sometimes they need a little bit more information. So really talking about or getting the opportunity to go into more detail and spend more time with students is important.
The special education teacher the only one that can refer a student? No, anyone can refer a student to VR. That could be a teacher, guidance counselor, family member. The student, if they're of legal age, can even refer him or herself by contacting a local VR office. Anybody can make a referral.
So who does voc rehab work with, and does it include students with severe disabilities? So like Katie said earlier, we work with anyone who has a physical or mental impairment or cognitive impairment that substantially interferes with their ability to work. And oftentimes in high school, we say work or learn. If a student doesn't have job experience, we look at how does their disability affect their ability to learn, and then that would be kind of transferable to the work setting. So anyone that fits that definition should be referred to the local VR office. For students with severe disabilities, we can assist with the cost of like one-on-one job coaching required of some students. If the school has provided documentation that they've done their match for project skills, and if the student needs more support than that, we can step in as an agency. After high school, or as they're transitioning out of high school, if the student gets accepted into to a community support provider or a CSP, we as Voc Rehab will and can continue working with the student outside of high school. So again, if we're able to build that relationship and work with the student and their family before we get to that point, the smoother that transition in the process can and should be. In the past, I'm sorry, I'm reading my notes. In the past, many students with disabilities or severe disabilities would go into a sheltered workshop and receive some minimum wage for their work. And now there's federal requirements that doesn't allow that unless they have gone through Voc Rehab first and really been determined too severe for services, which happens like less than 1% of the time. It's very rare that we aren't able to work with students or anybody with a severe disability.
So is VR a one-time service? Once VR determines that an individual is eligible, services are provided on a time-limited basis, depending on the needs of the individual. The individual's VR case will be closed if he or she achieves his or her employment goal, maintains the employment outcome for a period of time, but not less than 90 days, and agrees with their counselor that that the employment outcome is satisfactory and that they're performing well on the job. An individual can reapply for VR services if he or she encounters barriers to employment, such as being fired or laid off from a job, or an additional service is needed because something is interfering with their ability to maintain the job. And the client can also decline services at any time as well.
Should students be referred to VR even if they don't know what kind of job they want? Short answer, absolutely yes. We as Voc Rehab can have those conversations with students, and that's something that as teachers you can say, you know, this student really doesn't know what they want, but we need help helping them figure out what they want to do. So that gives the Voc Rehab counselor, they should pick up on that themselves, but also just kind of reinforces like, hey, we need to work on this together. And one of the ways that you can support me as the school is to talk to them about career exploration and the kinds of jobs they might want and how their schooling now will prepare them for that job after high school. So like, are they taking the right classes that they will need to get into a college that will allow them to reach that employment goal, or do they need to go to college? And just kind of, again, having those conversations that support both the school and the student to be better prepared for life after high school.
Should students be referred to VR if they already have a part-time job on their own? Yes. Again, VR is not only about providing project skills. There are a number of services that we can be providing to help the student prepare for their future. The counselor will determine if the student is eligible once that referral has been made. So again, please do not assume if the student will be eligible, just make the referral and let the counselor do that part.
For a student who wants to both work and go to college, what can VR do to help? So we will work with the student to identify that specific job goal, and together we develop that IPE, or that plan for employment, to decide what services will be necessary to support that goal. And then we'll move forward with providing those services, of course. So the development of the employment goal and identification of necessary services is an individualized process. So it might look different for Sam than it does for Tom, but it should be that way. We want to make sure that we are individualizing those services rather than providing a blanket statement for everybody.
And lastly, how long do VR services last? In general, VR services continue as long as the student is making progress towards the goal on their written IPE. After they are employed with their career of choice, VR will follow along for at least 90 days before closing the case to ensure things are going well. If services are needed later, their VR case can be reopened to help maintain that job, or they can reapply for services for help finding something new.
There's a couple questions in the chat. Should a student be referred if their disability is so severe that parents don't see them ever having a job? Yes, yes, yes. We've all seen this as voc rehab counselors and as teachers, where you see the potential for the student, but parents are just overwhelmed and they're like, I don't know what he could possibly do. That's where voc rehab comes in and says, let's try some things and see what that potential really is. And help open the minds of the parents to the possibilities for that student. Are there specific assessments that should be part of the final comprehensive evaluation for special ed that will assist with services after high school? Yes. In most cases, there are specific assessments, like the WACE is a really important one for students exiting the school system, making sure that we have that IQ assessment as well as the achievement or abilities testing. Again, for voc rehab, I guess we haven't covered this, but we require testing to be completed or updated within the last 3 years to determine eligibility. And that's because we want to make sure that information is current and appropriate. As students are transitioning out of high school, most times colleges, if they're going that direction, are also going to require updated testing, as well as CSPs or community service providers are going to want updated testing. So if a student has a, I don't want to say a minimal disability, but it's not going to really affect them, their success long-term, or they're not going to need very many or additional supports after high school, you know, it's not as important to get that updated testing. But if they're going to need accommodations at the college setting or a community service provider or adult services, that updated testing is really important.
And I saw
Katie?
that somebody had waved their hand earlier. I think it was a Connie.
Colleen, I unmuted you, Colleen. You should be able to ask your question if you can't put in the chat box.
Just to say good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are at 9:59, so I'll wrap this up here quick. But here's our contact information. And again, we want to give a special thanks to Michelle Martin. She was originally going to help present with us today to bring that school input, but they had a school board meeting to talk about COVID and how school is going to be this fall. So she isn't able to be with us. We do have some additional resources that I think were sent out. If you had attended the TSLP conference last year and came to my session, we highlighted a student from Timberlake and kind of the process of VR and the school working together and how that really assisted the student. We have a follow-up to that student. And so that's an additional resource that I think we sent over to Jenny to put on the website.